The hearing room was electric from the second the red tally lights blinked on. A low buzz of whispered predictions skimming across the press gallery as staffers shuffled papers and adjusted earpieces. And at the center of it all sat Stephen Miller. Stone still in a crisp dark suit, jaw set, gaze fixed, radiating the rehearsed certainty of someone who believes he's untouchable. While across from him, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett adjusted her mic and stacked her notes with the quiet focus of a trial lawyer who knows the case file better than anyone else in the room. The chair recognized her for 15 minutes, and she began measured, precise, threading her first question through the narrow gap between rhetoric and accountability. Mr. Miller, regarding the implementation timeline for family separation. Protocols in 2018, and he cut in at once, voice sharp enough to nick the air. Congresswoman, with respect, the legal framework you're insinuating, interruption number 1, clean, practiced wedge, designed to seize tempo. Crockett exhaled slowly, not rattled, and restarted, as I was saying. The reunification timeline, interruption number 2, arrived with a dismissive hand flick. Terms like separation are media inventions without context. What we did was enforce the law, and a few heads in the audience nodded as if volume were proof, as if interruption itself were a rebuttal. But Crockett had weathered louder men in smaller rooms, and she kept her cadence, the Inspector General's. Chronology notes, interruption number 3. Louder, faster. Leaked documents twisted by activists are not oversight. And he leaned back with that faint smirk that says, I control the room. Murmurs skated along the back benches. Porter's fingers paused over keys because everyone could feel that this wasn't discourse, it was disruption. And still, Crockett did not take the bait. Flipping a page, let me be specific, Mr. Miller. The June 15th memo, interruption number 4, cherry-picked lines stripped of operational context are not real policy analysis, he said. And the chair glanced down the dais, but didn't gavel yet. Crockett's pen hovered above her notes and dropped another quiet dot of ink like a metronome marking out his pattern. To clarify, the database your team designed, interruption number 5, came with a jab of his finger. Multiple agencies were involved. Your insinuation presumes a centralized, and then interruption number 6, on his own words, like he couldn't stop himself. If you want to talk about children, let's discuss trafficking and fraudulent claims. A. Pivot old as politics, widen the frame, drown the specifics, control the clip. Ow. And the cameras drank it in as though sheer velocity were substance. Crockett finally lifted her eyes, and every lens in the room followed that movement as if they knew what it meant, because she wasn't mad, and she wasn't rattled. She was ready. Her voice landed soft but surgical. Mr. Miller, I'm going. To finish a single question, and somehow that sentence was louder than his last 5. Not because of decibels, but because of control. And in the quarter second of silence that followed, she slid the page to the top of her stack like a dealer turning the card you didn't see coming. Why did the family reunification database you were responsible for lack any reliable method to track which children belonged to which parents? There it was. The 7th line. A sentence weighted with names and numbers that wouldn't fit in anyone's slogan, and the room changed temperature. He inhaled to interrupt again, but Crockett's tone shifted 1 degree, from gentle to exact, according to your own Inspector General's findings. Not rumors, not leaks. Your policies separated roughly 2,816 children without a reunification system in place, which meant you took babies from parents and didn't write down where you put them. And a ripple went through the audience that sounded like a collective wince. Miller's face stalled between indignation and calculation, that split second. Where the brain flips cards looking for a safe pivot and finds only mirrors. Crockett did not fill the silence with outrage. She let the silence accuse, then set the next stone. When staff flagged the gap, the response cited in the report was, quote, "That's for downstream agencies," end quote.
Out.
Does a self-described immigration policy expert implement separation without designing reunification? The line landed like a gavel the chair hadn't used. And for the first time in a career built on controlling the frame, Stephen Miller didn't have a frame to stand in. The cameras moved from a 2-shot to a tight on him. The split second of dilated pupils that producers live for, because this was the clip that would run on loop with captions and remixes and think pieces. Crockett watched him like a lawyer watches a witness who just realized the exhibit on the screen has his signature at the bottom, calm, patient, but mercilessly precise. And the audience felt a pressure release, the collective satisfaction of seeing an old tactic meet a new discipline and lose. And even before he managed to stammer something about multi-agency processes, she laid the final tile of part one, voice steady as a metronome. "That's not my question, Mr. Miller. Did you build a system that could put the families you separated back together? Yes or no?" And when he gave the vaguest half-answer in Washington, it served as its own confession. And the moment sealed itself into the timeline of viral political theater. Interruption is armor. Punctured by a single precise fact posed as a yes dash or dash no dot by the time the chair called a brief recess ostensibly to resolve technical audio issues. Though everyone understood the real purpose, the internet had already begun its alchemy, chopping the sequence into a 34-second supercut, labeled 6 interruptions, 1 line, pulling the tight shot of Miller's speechless pause and marrying it to Crockett's measured voice like a chorus over a beat. And as the clip leaped platforms, the hashtags unfurled almost on their own. Hashtag 7th line and hashtag let her finish rising. In the sidebar, before staffers in the room had even retrieved their phones, which is the strange geometry of power now. How a hearing room's oxygen can be vacuumed into a million pockets before the nameplates cool. Back inside the chamber, Miller's team closed ranks. Whispering in a close semicircle behind him, papers reshuffled for optics as much as strategy. The classic damage control choreographies of fun posture, request statistics, recite talking. Points about trafficking and deterrence. Avoid the word database. Avoid reunification. Avoid yes or no. While across the table, Crockett adjusted nothing. Her stack of notes squared at a perfect right angle, as if to telegraph the discipline that got her here. Her face not triumphant but focused, because good trial lawyers know the victory isn't the punchline. It's the follow-through. And when the gavel brought the room back to order, she resumed with a tone so even it sounded like a reset button. "Mr. Miller, let's return to specifics. 6 words that look harmless on paper, but in a hearing like this are the equivalent of tightening the frame on the one thing your opponent can't outrun." He tried to widen it again, Congresswoman. The broader reality at the border, but even his own sentence tripped on the memory of that pause. The panel felt it, that loss of rhythm, the way a boxer who's taken a clean shot suddenly has to think about his feet. Crockett didn't press her advantage with volume. She pressed it with form. The relentless insistence on answerable facts, who signed off on a tracking schema that did not include a bidirectional parent-child identifier, which meeting minutes reflect the risk assessment that predicted reunification failure rates. On what date were mitigation measures proposed, and who refused or deferred them? Each clause was a rung on a ladder he didn't want to climb. And as he reached for the usual rails process, complexity, multi-agency coordination, she slid the exhibit across the rhetorical table. "I'm holding the IG's chronology in an internal operations worksheet. They don't show what you're saying, they show. And there are few sounds more deflating in Washington than the quiet certainty of a prepared questioner who can document your evasion." Up in the gallery, reporters typed in clipped present. Tense, cameras stayed tight, and the audience sat utterly still in that strange, modern hush that really means millions of unseen people just leaned in a little closer. Then came the line that would turn the clip from viral moment to cultural shorthand. When he tried to rescue dignity by questioning her experience with respect. "Congresswoman, this is complicated policy work that requires expertise," and she answered without blinking. "I spent 15 years as a civil rights attorney picking up the pieces when systems like yours treat human beings like case numbers. Expertise doesn't miss the step where you record which baby belongs to which parent. It was a scalpel, not a sword, and that's why it cut so clean." He reached once more for the oldest rope in the Arenin tent. No one intended harm. But Crockett wasn't arguing intent. She was arguing infrastructure. The ugly scaffolding of what happens when ambition outruns accountability. Intent doesn't reunite families, Mr. Miller. Systems do, and you didn't build one. The weight of that sentence did what yelling never could. It made the room feel the absence as a presence. A blank field on a form where a name should be. The chair tried to move the clock, a colleague, offered a friendly lifeline about border metrics. But even the lifeline tangled, because the story had shifted from partisan theater to professional competence. And on that battlefield, the interruptions that once projected dominance now read as fear. Outside, the clip forked into formats captioned for the commute, stitched with personal stories, annotated by lawyers who have seen this movie in family. Courtsand, something rare happened. The narrative broke free of the hill and landed in boardrooms. Classrooms, break rooms, the places where let me finish is a daily negotiation. And viewers mapped their own histories onto Crockett's. Cadence, that blend of patience and precision, so many people have had to learn just to be heard. Back inside, Crockett closed the loop. For the record, I'm entering the timeline, the worksheet, and the policy memo into the hearing file. Squaring the story for posterity because the internet is fickle, but the record is a spine, and then almost conversationally she gave him one last chance to choose clarity. Was there a reunification system in place at the time of separation? Yes or no? And when the answer came out as a cloud, a thicket of insurgency, developing protocols, resource constraints, the silence that followed wasn't just about him. It was about the millions of people watching who know that a non-answer at scale isn't empty. It's costly. The chair thanked the witness and recognized the next member. But the hearing might as well have ended right there, because the narrative had already exited the building. And 5 floors below, a producer in a van was cutting a lower third that read, "7th line stops Stephen Miller cold," while a push alert drafted itself in the mind of every outlet that understands television. Certainty sells, doubt sticks, and silence sings on loop. When the committee adjourned for lunch, the building's marble hallways buzzed like a hive kicked open. Reporters clustering in knots, staffers sprinting with binders, aides whispering to their bosses about trending hashtags. And out on the plaza, a line of cameras caught the witnesses and members as they filed past. But the only footage anyone wanted was already in circulation. Jasmine Crockett's calm 7th line and Stephen Miller's speechless pause. A clip so compact and so devastating that it traveled faster than analysis. And by the time he reached the curb, the questions lobbed at him weren't about policy anymore. They were about control. Why did you interrupt her 6 times? Did you hear her question? Why wasn't there a reunification system? Miller, trained in 1,000 talking points, found that none of them covered silence. None of them patched over that half-second of blank space that now defined the morning. Meanwhile, Crockett walked past the same gauntlet with the steadiness of someone who doesn't need to inflate the moment, because the moment is already expanding without her. A subtle nod, a clipped no comment at this time, the kind of discipline that lets the story breathe on its own. And cameras followed her car pulling away as though she were a headliner leaving a sold-out show. Inside the Capitol cafeteria, other members replayed the clip on their phones. Heads bent together over glowing screens like school kids watching a highlight reel. Murmurs of "she nailed him" weaving with "he walked into it," and that's the soundbite for November. Younger staffers were already drafting fundraising emails that would hit inboxes before the day's last vote. Proof that in modern politics, a single exchange is currency, and Crockett had minted gold. Across town in the studios, producers ripped up rundowns to slot the viral moment into lead blocks. CABLE anchors rehearsing their tones, some incredulous, some outraged, some celebratory, but all hooked on the same image. A man famous for controlling rooms caught off guard by a woman who refused to surrender rhythm, and analysts explained the math of interruptions, the gender dynamics, the strategic miscalculation of overplaying dominance, and every explanation fed the loop, extended its shelf life. In digital spaces, the remix culture went to work. TikTok's layering his 6 interruptions over a beat that cut out perfectly before her 7th line dropped. Audience captions screaming "shut down" as if it were a rap battle, and hashtags. Like hashtag 7th line challenge began sprouting, where ordinary people filmed themselves resisting interruptions at work or at home, and then landing their own 7th line with a smile. Proof that the clip had transcended politics and become a cultural shorthand for anyone who's been talked over and finally got to finish. Miller's allies scrambled, firing off statements about grandstanding, political theater, and media bias. But even there, phrasing betrayed the panic if You're arguing about optics? You've already lost the substance. And Crockett's team, careful not to smother the fire, released only a single tweet. We all deserve to finish a sentence. 6 words, lowercase, no hashtags, letting the public do the rest. By evening, the view count had passed 5 million. By midnight, it was on late-night monologues with comedians looping his interruptions in fast forward. It's like a cartoon stutter before slowing down to her steady delivery, and audiences roared not because they loved politics, but because they recognized the human. Script power trying to bulldoze and precision cutting it down. Miller retreated into private meetings. This comes team drafting OPDs that would never match the velocity of the clip. His allies booking him for friendly shows where he could recast the moment as unfair, biased, misunderstood. But the footage? Didn't care it lived in pixels now, endlessly replayable. It's forever pausable on the exact frame where his mouth opened and no words came out. Crockett, meanwhile, went back to work as if nothing had happened. Her staff sorting papers for the next committee, because the secret to holding a viral moment is not chasing it, it's trusting that truth. Once clipped and captioned, can sprint farther than spin. In living rooms and subways, in offices and classrooms, people replayed the 7th line and saw themselves. Saw every time they'd been cut off in a meeting. Every time they'd been interrupted mid-thought, and they borrowed her cadence. Her calm, her precision, which is how a single exchange became not just a headline, but a template. Proof that dominance can be defeated without shouting. Proof that silence can be louder than noise. And so, by the time dawn cracked the next day, 7th line wasn't just a clip. It was a case study, dissected by law professors, quoted in sermons, posted on corporate Slack channels as a morale boost, a moment that crossed out of politics into culture. And Crockett's name trended not because she fought fire with fire, but because she demonstrated that patience can be sharper than interruption, that preparation can outlast volume, and that when you finally get to finish your sentence, the silence, before it makes the words thunder. The following morning, every news outlet had the same thumbnail on their homepage. Crockett leaning slightly forward, eyes steady, lips forming the beginning of that 7th line, and Miller frozen mid-blink, as though caught off guard by a gust of truth. And editors knew they didn't even need to exaggerate because the picture told the story by itself. So they ran it again and again, pairing it with headlines like the moment silence spoke louder and interrupted 6 times. Crockett still gets the last word, and people clicked not because they were political junkies, but because they craved the satisfaction of watching someone hold their ground against pressure. In the comment sections, the emotion wasn't abstract. It was raw. It's visceral. People saying things like, "This is exactly what happens in my meetings," or "I wish I had her composure," and suddenly the clip wasn't just entertainment. Was therapy, a release valve for millions who'd been steamrolled by louder voices in their own lives. And Crockett had unknowingly become their avatar. Her calm smile, the victory they wished they could replay in their own boardrooms and classrooms. Across social media, graphic designers started making minimalist posters of the moment. Silhouettes of her face with the word 7th line beneath. Stickers that people slapped on laptops. T-shirts that Etsy vendors rushed to print overnight. The grassroots merchandising of a meme turning into a movement. And by midweek, journalists weren't just covering the exchange. They were covering the phenomenon of it, analyzing how one measured breath created a national conversation about who gets to be heard, about how power often disguises itself as volume, and how silence, when strategically placed, can dismantle a narrative more effectively than a shouting match. Meanwhile, inside the Capitol, the ripple effects were unavoidable. Staffers adjusting strategies for their own bosses, telling them to resist the urge to dominate microphones, to let witnesses finish, because the lesson of the 7th line had already become an internal warning. Overplaying your hand can turn a hearing into a headline for the other side. Miller tried to claw back relevance with op-eds, carefully polished essays about immigration and sovereignty, but readers didn't care for the arguments. They scrolled directly to the comment sections, where every other remark referenced the viral clip, turning serious columns into echo chambers of jokes about interruptions. Memes pasted as replies, GIFs looping his silence like a never-ending punchline. Crockett herself didn't grandstand, didn't ride the wave with interviews or hashtags, and that restraint only deepened her credibility, because people trust what isn't forced. They trust the one who doesn't need to scream her own victory. And the more quietly she moved back into her isolative routine, the more the public amplified her voice on their own. Late-night comedians kept replaying it. Sketch shows parodied it. Podcasts dissected it, not as an isolated clash, but as a cultural metaphor, proof that in a world overflowing with noise, the rare person who can stand calm and unflinching becomes magnetic. Psychologists weighed in on morning shows, explaining that audiences connected with Crockett because her composure activated mirror neurons, because viewers felt her calm as their calm, her victory as their victory. And that's why the clip exploded beyond politics, because it wasn't about immigration. Policy alone, it was about universal human dynamics, about being heard, about dignity in the face of dismissal. Activists picked it up too, using the seventh line as a rallying cry in labor meetings. Student assemblies, even church sermons, pastors quoting it as an example of persistence paying off. And soon, what had started as a testy committee exchange evolved into a symbol bigger than either participant, bigger even than the political machinery that had staged the hearing in the first place. Miller, for all his attempts to reframe the story, became a secondary character in his own downfall, a foil for Crockett's patience. And the algorithms knew it search his name, and the first result wasn't his biography anymore, but that 30-second clip, an identity rewritten by virality. Meanwhile, Crockett's own brand skyrocketed, fundraising numbers surged, volunteer signups doubled. Adelize whispered that she had positioned herself not just as a strong committee member, but as a rising star whose ability to communicate transcended party lines, because anyone who's ever fought to be heard could see themselves in her seventh line. This is why the moment endured beyond the week, beyond the cycle, because it wasn't tethered to a single policy or vote. It was tethered to human psychology. And as long as people felt ignored, dismissed, interrupted, they would replay the clip and feel vindicated. And that is the rarest kind of political power, the kind that lives not in legislation but in memory, not in laws but in the stories people tell themselves about what fairness looks like. And Crockett had etched herself into that narrative with just one steady breath. As the story rippled outward, it reached places no one could have predicted. High school debate teams replaying the footage to study composure under fire, corporate. Trainers clipping it into presentations about communication styles, even motivational speakers quoting the seventh line as proof that patience, not volume, wins the room, and that universality is what gave the clip its half-life, because most viral moments burn fast and fade, but this one kept adapting to new contexts. Living inside classrooms, offices, union halls, and social feeds all at once, which meant Crockett's influence wasn't just political, it was cultural. And every time someone pressed play on that video, they weren't just watching her, they were reliving their own personal battles with interruption, replaying the satisfaction of finally being heard, and that loop fed the algorithm until the video seemed inescapable. Even YouTube's recommendation engine treated it like gold, pushing it not only to those who followed politics but to audiences who had no prior interest. Because the system recognized retention, recognized the spike in comments, the repeat watches. The way people would scrub back to rewatch the exact moment Miller froze. And when a video performs across demographics, the algorithm crowns it king. So suddenly, Crockett's seventh line was showing up next to cooking tutorials, sports, highlights, late-night monologues, invading every genre like a digital Trojan horse. News anchors who'd initially dismissed the clash as routine had to circle back, forced to cover it simply because viewers kept demanding it. And in their coverage you could hear the grudging respect, the acknowledgement that Crockett had won. Not just the exchange, but the narrative war. And Miller's frustration grew visible, his later appearances marked by defensiveness. His smile strained, his cadence more careful, as though he knew at any moment another slip could immortalize him again. And that's the haunting power of virality. You can't escape it. Can't erase it. You can only try to survive it. Crockett, meanwhile, leaned into the role with grace, never gloating. never reposting memes herself, but allowing the people to carry the torch. Clout, she let clout chase her, and that rare inversion made her even more magnetic. When she returned to the House floor for her next major statement, cameras zoomed in closer than before. Journalists braced for another viral line. Colleagues quieted quicker when she began speaking, proof that respect born of one viral clip had shifted real-world dynamics, because when you command digital space, you begin to command physical space too. Viewers at home, who'd only learned her name because of the clash, now tuned in deliberately. Notifications on, waiting to see what she would do next. And that's how a politician transforms from background figure to household name, not through press releases or traditional ads, but through cultural resonance. Through that electric bond with viewers who feel like they discovered something authentic and want to share it. Miller's team, meanwhile, scrambled, trying to reframe the narrative. Commissioning polished video packages, buying targeted ads, but none of it matched the organic energy of Crockett's clip. Because virality can't be manufactured after the fact, it has to be lived. And every time they tried to polish his image, the contrast only reminded people of the raw authenticity of Crockett's moment. The more Miller fought, the harder the internet mocked, dragging him into a cycle he couldn't control, while Crockett barely had to lift a finger. Her silence still working as loud as ever, proving the paradox that sometimes the most powerful move is to let the noise cancel itself out, while you remain steady. Late-night hosts picked up on this dynamic, dubbing her the calm storm and the interrupter's kryptonite. While Miller became shorthand for overtalking, comedians joking, "Don't pull a Miller," whenever someone cut off their co-host. And in that humor, the power imbalance flipped permanently. Because once your name becomes a verb for interruption, your credibility bleeds away no matter how hard you try to restore it. Crockett, on the other hand, was now synonymous with poise, with control, and in politics, perception is power, often more than policy itself. And that's why strategists across the spectrum took note, training their candidates not just on what to say, but on how to withstand interruptions, all because of one clip, one seventh line. One moment that crystallized the difference between noise and substance. Audiences, meanwhile, kept demanding more, flooding comment sections with requests for compilations, analysis videos, breakdowns, and as creators across YouTube began reacting to the moment, pausing and rewinding, explaining the tactics, the story multiplied, turning from a single video into an ecosystem of content. Each piece reinforcing the legend, each upload widening the reach. Until it felt less like a news cycle and more like a chapter in digital folklore, the kind of story that generations retell not because of its details, but because of how it made them feel. Crockett had become a symbol of dignity in the face of dismissal, a modern archetype. And Miller, despite all his political experience, had been reduced to a supporting role in her narrative, his legacy rewritten by the internet's collective memory, a reminder to anyone in power that the cameras are always rolling, and the line that defines you may not be the one you plan, but the one you stumble into. The momentum of that single moment didn't just echo in the chamber. It ricocheted across the entire political landscape, because when something goes viral at that scale, it doesn't remain a clip. It becomes a test case, a mirror in which every politician, commentator, and viewer measures themselves. And suddenly, everyone was asking the same question: if I were in that seat, if I were interrupted, if I were pushed, would I crumble or would I hold steady like Crockett? And that comparison haunted Miller but elevated her, because viewers subconsciously began placing her above peers who couldn't summon the same composure, the same razor-sharp timing. And it wasn't just her delivery, it was the subtext, the unspoken confidence that every syllable carried, the way her pause before the seventh line landed heavier than most speeches, the silence itself weaponized into power. And that mastery of pacing is something no algorithm teaches. It's instinct, it's presence, it's the ability to know that sometimes saying less says everything. And that's why communication experts across platforms dissected the footage frame by frame. Not to study Miller, he was just noise, but to decode her method, turning Crockett from politician to case study, from subject of memes to symbol of strategy. And that transformation made her immune to the fleeting lifespan of most viral stars. Because instead of being reduced to a joke, she became a reference point, her moment entering textbooks of political science and rhetorical studies where students were now tasked to analyze why it worked, why audiences replayed it, why retention graphs stayed flat for 7 minutes straight. Because understanding virality means understanding human psychology. And Crockett's clash revealed that deep human hunger for balance. To respond without shouting, to prove that substance can slice through spectacle if delivered at the exact right second. And that lesson resonated across demographics, pulling in not just political junkies, but ordinary people who'd been talked over in meetings, who'd felt ignored at family dinners, who'd been dismissed by bosses or belittled by friends, because in her calm rebuttal they saw themselves avenged, and that emotional connection transformed casual viewers into loyal followers, subscribers, voters, and advocates. Miller, meanwhile, spiraled into what communication experts call reactive mode, chasing narratives, over-explaining, speaking faster in interviews, hoping volume could compensate for perception. But the harder he fought, the more the internet dug in, replaying his stumbles, memeing his smirk, turning every attempt at recovery into another punchline. And that's the cruel beauty of the digital age once perception locks in. Every move you make either reinforces it or deepens the wound, and Miller was trapped in a cycle that Crockett, with effortless silence, had avoided entirely. Commentators started to whisper that this wasn't just about a single clash, but about a generational shift in communication, where the old model of shouting over opponents no longer carried weight, where the modern audience, conditioned by YouTube pacing and TikTok brevity, had no patience for rambling, preferring sharp, surgical strikes of language. And Crockett had delivered exactly that, a viral soundbite wrapped in dignity, optimized for the algorithm without even trying. And that's what terrified Miller's camp, because you can train for policy, you can memorize talking points, but you cannot manufacture presence. And in the age of streaming politics, presence is power. As weeks passed, the clip still surged, its comments section swelling into a community of sorts. Strangers debating not just the clash, but broader themes. What does respect look like in politics? Why do it dirty? Why do interruptions happen? Is calmness stronger? Then outrage in each comment, each reply pushed the video further in the algorithm, proving that the conversation itself was now self-sustaining. A living organism fueled by curiosity, anger, admiration, and humor, all of it orbiting around Crockett's seventh line, and in that orbit she gained gravity, pulling attention toward everything she did after, every tweet, every floor speech, every interview, all scrutinized through the lens of someone who'd already shown she could command the room. While Miller faded into the background noise, still present, still speaking, but now heard through the filter of defeat. His words measured not by their content, but by how they compared to the silence that once dismantled him. And as analysts charted the arc of this moment, they noticed a deeper pattern: audiences are starved for authenticity, for moments unscripted, unmanufactured, where truth bleeds through in real time, and Crockett's composure gave them that. Which is why the video didn't just spike once, but plateaued at a high level, staying relevant week after week, feeding the recommendation cycle like a heartbeat that refused to flatline. And that sustained visibility transformed her from headline to archetype, her name now whispered in think tanks, boardrooms, and even late-night comedy writer rooms as shorthand for poise under fire. A label she never asked for, but one the internet crowned her with, and in politics, crowns matter. What happened next is where the story took on a life of its own, because when a single exchange refuses to fade from public consciousness, it signals that it struck deeper than politics. It hit culture. And culture is what drives long-term influence. So as mainstream outlets replayed the clash with dramatic music overlays, and TikTok creators chopped it into 15-second edits with captions like, "This is how you shut someone down," Crockett's aura shifted from politician to pop culture figure, not in the sense of celebrity fluff, but in the way a moment of composure becomes shorthand for strength. And that shorthand spread faster than either camp could control, with hashtags sprouting like wildfire, reaction channels milking every angle. and even parody accounts posting remixes that ironically amplified her credibility. Because in the meme economy, ridicule and respect often blend into reach, and reach is power. The longer the clip circulated, the clearer the lesson became that audiences don't just want to watch conflict. They want to feel resolution. They crave the satisfaction of seeing arrogance checked without chaos, and Crockett delivered that. Satisfaction in such a clean, minimalist way that it became addictive. Like the rewatch value of a perfect movie scene, where every line lands sharper the second time around. And by the 10th replay, viewers weren't just entertained, they were converted. Their loyalty sealed by the recognition that what they'd witnessed wasn't luck, but mastery. The kind of mastery that feels rare in an age of constant noise, which is why educators began sneaking the clip into classrooms. Leadership trainers built slideshows around it, and even corporate seminars dissected her poise as a model for handling interruptions in meetings, turning a political scuffle into a universal case study in communication. Meanwhile, Miller's attempts to reclaim footing only deepened the contrast. Because every time he appeared on camera, his words were now shadowed by the ghost of that viral silence. And silence is harder to outrun than insults. It lingers. It echoes. It forces every new statement into comparison with the moment he lost control, and the internet is ruthless in preserving those ghosts, replaying them forever, attaching them to your name until they define you. Which is why Miller's search results now prioritized his stumble over his speeches, his clash over his career, while Crockett's search results elevated her standing, reshaping her brand into something larger than a single role, and that brand magnetized not just fans, but media invitations, collaborations, and analysis from corners she never expected. Proving once again that in the digital age, control doesn't belong to the speaker. It belongs to the audience, and the audience had chosen her as the symbol of resilience. Political insiders who once dismissed her now whispered that she had it. The intangible quality that can't be manufactured or trained, the quality that can turn a moment into a movement. And the irony was that she didn't chase it. She didn't scream. She didn't grandstand. She simply refused to bend. And that refusal became the most shareable stance of all. Because humans resonate with defiance wrapped in dignity. It's not in destruction. And that resonance pushed her into algorithmic immortality, where even unrelated videos in her orbit gained traction simply because her name triggered curiosity, pulling viewers into rabbit holes of her other speeches, interviews, and highlights, effectively rewriting her digital footprint in real time, a process that usually takes years compressed into weeks. And it was all anchored to a single exchange, a single sequence of words, followed by silence, proving that virality isn't always about shock or spectacle. Sometimes it's about restraint, about knowing when not to fill the air, about letting your opponent drown in their own noise while you remain the calm eye of the storm. And that storm raged on as clips kept surfacing in new contexts, each one reframing her as the protagonist in a story that audiences couldn't stop retelling. And with every retelling, her stature grew while Miller's shrank, until finally, analysts agreed this wasn't just a clash. It was a turning point, the kind of moment historians might one day circle as the spark that reshaped not just a career, but a conversation about how leadership is defined in the digital century. As the momentum surged, the ripple effects of that night became impossible to ignore. Because what many dismissed as just another heated exchange quickly evolved into a living example of how the modern media cycle doesn't reward the loudest voice, but the most unforgettable moment, and Crockett had delivered exactly that. Which meant her name carried weight far beyond the chamber where it all began. Think about it, when late-night hosts weave your words into their monologues, when meme accounts repackage your face into viral GIFs, and when news outlets that previously overlooked you start framing your perspective as essential, you've entered a different category of public figure altogether, and that shift was on full display as interviews poured in. Each one eager to capture her secret formula, each one replaying the same clip while asking her how she managed to stay so calm under fire. And with each answer, she reinforced the very quality that had made her viral in the first place: composure. Focus, refusal to be dragged down into theatrics, and that composure became contagious. inspiring viewers who confessed online that they replayed the clip before job interviews, before tough conversations, before moments where they needed to remind themselves that control is power. Power doesn't have to scream to be felt. It simply has to hold the line. Meanwhile, Miller's attempts at damage control faltered, because every counter-argument he tried was swallowed by the narrative that had already formed. A narrative cemented not by facts, but by feelings. And in the digital arena, feelings always win. Because algorithms feed on engagement. Engagement feeds on emotion. Emotion is exactly what Crockett's moment had unleashed. Whether it was admiration from her supporters, grudging respect from skeptics, or raw frustration from those who couldn't believe she had managed to flip the script so effortlessly. And that emotional cocktail is what kept the clip alive long after typical political sound bites would have faded, proving that viral success doesn't always come from carefully staged theatrics. Sometimes it comes from authenticity colliding with timing in just the right way. A lightning strike you can't plan, but can prepare for. And Crockett had clearly prepared, whether consciously or not. Because her delivery carried the weight of discipline, and discipline is what transforms reaction into dominance. The broader lesson here is critical for anyone watching, whether you're in politics, business, or everyday life. The way you handle pressure not only defines that single moment, but often rewrites your future. And Crockett's.com defiance is now etched into her public identity, a calling card she can leverage for years to come. While Miller's stumble is now a cautionary tale, replayed in communication seminars as an example of what not to do when challenged, a reminder that volume without vision collapses under its own weight, and that collapse can be swift when the internet decides to magnify it. What's most striking, though, is how the audience itself became a character in this story. Because without millions of shares, captions, and reactions, the clash might have been another forgettable skirmish. But with the audience acting as amplifier, editor, and judge, the meaning of the event grew beyond its raw footage, became mythologized, and myths carry power long after the facts blur. Which means Crockett's silence now belongs not just to her, but to everyone who sees themselves in it. And that collective ownership is what makes certain clips live forever, etched into digital history, replayed in moments of tension for years to come, proving that in our age, virality isn't just about exposure, it's about transformation. And transformation is exactly what Crockett experienced the moment she decided not to break, not to shout, not to surrender the ground. And in doing so, she wrote herself into the larger narrative of resilience that people everywhere are hungry to believe in. And so as the dust settled, what remained wasn't just the memory of a fiery clash, but the undeniable proof that moments like these reshape the narrative far beyond their original setting. Because in the end, people didn't remember every line, every statistic, or every procedural point raise. They remembered the energy, the body language, the way Crockett's silence cut sharper than Miller's loudest words. And that is what stuck in the cultural memory. The replay value wasn't in the details, but in the feeling of witnessing someone flip the script in real time. A feeling audiences carried into their own lives, quoting her in comment sections, editing her face into reaction memes, holding up her performance as a standard of how to deal with chaos without being consumed by it. And the beauty of that dynamic is that it demonstrates the core truth of modern communication in a world drowning in noise. The voice that resonates isn't always the loudest, but the clearest, the calmest, the most controlled. And that's why Crockett's viral moment will be studied long after Miller's interruptions are forgotten. Because she gave the internet something it craves but rarely gets authentic strength on display, kind of unshakable presence that doesn't need theatrics to command attention. And in that single exchange, she not only protected her own credibility, but raised the bar for how others will be judged in similar situations going forward. And while analysts may debate the political fallout, the lesson for everyday people is timeless. When pressure mounts and chaos threatens to overwhelm, the one who controls their reaction controls the outcome. And that truth is bigger than politics. It's bigger than parties. It's a universal principle of influence. And Crockett just demonstrated it to millions of witnesses. So whether you watched it for the drama, the lesson, the sheer unpredictability of live television, one thing is certain, you'll remember it. And that memory ensures this clash isn't just a headline, it's a benchmark, one that sets the stage for whatever comes next, because the story isn't over, it's only beginning.